Welcome, gentle traveler, to a place where the world softens at its edges. Tonight, let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders like silk sliding across skin. Let your breathing find its natural rhythm, slow, deep, effortless, as the evening wraps itself around you in layers of peace. Tonight's story comes from ancient harbors, whispered across centuries by sailors who watched stars guide their ships across endless waters. It is a tale of vast oceans and distant islands, of courage that grows quietly in the heart, and of how even the longest journey begins with a single step onto a wooden deck. To sail with Sinbad, a name carried on warm winds, spoken in marketplaces where spices perfume the air, and remembered wherever travelers gather to share the wonders they have seen. But before we begin, let yourself settle into this moment. Picture a world where the sea meets the sky in a line so smooth it seems drawn by a patient hand. Imagine the scent of salt air mingling with cinnamon and cloves, the gentle creak of ships rocking in their berths, and the distant call of gulls drifting across the harbor at twilight. There, in a city of white stone buildings that glow golden in the setting sun, where narrow streets wind between market stalls and gardens bloom behind carved wooden gates, our story finds its beginning. Breathes with life, merchants arranging their wares in careful rows, children running barefoot through fountains, old men sipping tea in shaded courtyards, while the world moves softly around them. The air hums with 1,000 small sounds, the splash of oars in the harbor, the rustle of palm fronds overhead, the musical call of vendors selling fresh bread and honeyed dates. And at the edge of this city, where the cobblestones give way to wooden docks, where ships from distant lands rest with their sails furled and their hulls rocking gently on the tide, there lives a young man named Sinbad. But do not rush to meet him yet. Let the world settle first. Feel the warmth of late afternoon sun on your skin. Hear the water lapping against the dock posts, that endless rhythm that has lulled sailors to sleep for thousands of years. Smell the sea, that deep, living scent of salt and distance and possibility. This story, like the ocean itself, does not hurry. It unfolds in waves, each one carrying you deeper into rest, each one washing away the concerns of waking hours. Sinbad was not born to the sea. He did not grow up on ships or learn to read the stars from his father's knee. No, Sinbad came to the ocean the way rivers find the sea, naturally, inevitably, drawn by something deeper than reason. In his youth, he had been like any young man in the city, learning his father's trade, walking familiar streets, knowing what each day would ask of him. His life held comfort, predictability, and the warm contentment that comes from understanding one's place in the world. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Sinbad would walk to the harbor and watch the ships preparing to leave. He would see sailors checking their ropes, captains studying charts by lamplight, merchants loading crates of goods bound for places whose names sounded like music. And something in his heart would stir, gently at first, like the first breath of wind that signals a change in weather. A longing, a curiosity, a whisper that said the world was wider than the streets he knew, deeper than the life already laid out before him. So one in shades of rose and gold, Sinbad made a choice. He sold what little he owned, bid farewell to his friends and family, and walked down to the docks where a merchant ship was preparing to depart. The captain was a weathered man with kind eyes and hands marked by years of rope and salt water. He looked at Sinbad, young, uncertain, hopeful, and smiled. "You wish to sail?" the captain asked. "Yes," Sinbad replied simply. The captain nodded slowly. The sea teaches many lessons. Some are gentle, some are hard, but all are true. If you wish to learn them, you are welcome aboard. And so, with a heart full of wonder and a bag holding only what he could carry, Sinbad stepped onto the deck of his first ship. The wood beneath his feet swayed gently, alive with the movement of the water below. The sails snapped softly in the breeze, ready to catch the wind and carry them away from everything familiar. As the ship pulled away from the dock, Sinbad watched his city grow smaller, the white buildings shrinking, the sounds fading, until all that remained was the open water stretching endlessly in every direction, and the horizon calling him forward. The first days at sea were filled with new sensations. The constant rocking of the ship, the way the world tilted and swayed in a rhythm Sinbad had never known. The taste of salt on his lips, the sun reflecting off the water in a million dancing lights, the endless blue, above and below, until it seemed as though the ship sailed through sky rather than sea. Sinbad learned to tie knots, to read the wind, to move with the ship's motion rather than against it. He learned the names of things he had never needed words for: bow and stern, port and starboard, the different shapes of clouds that spoke of weather yet to come. At night, when his work was done and the ship sailed on beneath a canopy of stars, Sinbad would lie on the deck and gaze upward. The stars at sea seemed brighter than they ever had on land, uncountable diamonds scattered across black velvet, each one steady and patient and impossibly distant. The old sailors told him their names, showed him how to find his direction by their positions, shared stories of constellations and the legends woven around them. And Sinbad listened, letting their words blend with the sound of water rushing past the hull, creating a lullaby that carried him into deep, dreamless sleep. They sailed, stopping at ports where new languages filled the air, where markets overflowed with goods Sinbad had never imagined: carved ivory, bright textiles, strange fruits that tasted of sunshine and rain. Each place added another layer to his understanding of how vast the world truly was. But greatest teacher, in its moods, calm and stormy, playful and dangerous, generous and withholding, Sinbad learned patience. He learned humility. He learned that human will meant little against forces so much larger than himself. He learned something else, something quieter, that adventure was not about conquering the world, but about opening yourself to it, about watching and listening and letting the world reveal itself in its own time. Discharged, this understanding would serve him well in all that was to come, for Sinbad's journeys were only beginning. 7 voyages awaited him, 7 chances to sail beyond the edge of the known world, 7 opportunities to discover not just distant lands, but the depths of his own courage and wisdom. But tonight, we will not rush through all 7 voyages as though racing towards some distant shore. Instead, we will drift through them gently, letting each one unfold in its own time, allowing the rhythm of the story to lull you deeper into rest. So settle yourself now. Let your body sink into comfort. Let your thoughts grow soft and distant, like clouds dissolving in a warm sky. The story will carry you forward, gentle as a current, safe as a ship guided by steady hands. On Sinbad's first voyage beyond familiar waters, his ship sailed toward islands marked on charts with names that seemed more legend than geography. The crew spoke of these places in hushed tones, lands where the rules that governed the known world bent in strange and wondrous ways. Mabani, they saw nothing but water. The horizon remained unbroken, an endless circle with the ship at its center. Time itself seemed to blur, each day identical to the last, the sun rising, arcing across the sky, setting in brilliant colors before giving way to star-filled darkness. Then one morning, as mist lifted off the calm water, an island appeared. It rose from the sea gradually, first just a shadow in the distance, then a dark shape, then finally a visible landmass, green and lush, with a beach of pale sand gleaming in the early light. They ordered the anchor dropped, and the crew prepared to go ashore for fresh water and whatever fruit might grow in the island's interior. Sinbad volunteered eagerly, curious to set foot on land after so long at sea. The island seemed perfect, almost too perfect. Gentle slopes rose from the beach, covered in vegetation so green it seemed to glow. Birds sang in the trees, their melodies sweet and welcoming. A stream ran down from the hills, its water clear and cold and delicious to taste. Crew spread out, some filling water barrels, others gathering fruit, a few simply resting in the shade after weeks of harsh sun and salt spray. Sinbad walked inland, following the stream, marveling at flowers he had never seen before. Blooms as large as his hand, colored in shades that seemed painted by an artist's brush rather than grown by nature. But as the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm, something Sinbad's feet trembled. Just slightly at first, barely noticeable. Then again, stronger. He looked around, confused. Earthquakes at sea were not unheard of, but this felt different. The trembling had a rhythm to it, like breathing. Sinbad ran back toward the beach, calling to the others. As the crew gathered, the trembling grew stronger, and then, impossibly, the entire island began to move. Water churned around them as the truth revealed itself. This was no island at all, but a creature of the deep, a whale so enormous that forests had taken root on its back, so ancient that it had floated motionless long enough for an entire ecosystem to flourish upon its skin. Now, disturbed by the fire the crew had lit to cook their meal, the great beast was waking. The ground, its back, shifted and swayed. Trees tilted. The stream Sinbad had followed began to slide sideways. The captain's return, quickly, it's diving! Punctuation might have seized them, but Sinbad felt instead a strange, calm clarity. He helped the others toward the boats, making sure no one was left behind as the whale's massive form began to sink beneath the waves. The water rose around their ankles, their knees, their waists. Sinbad was the last to leave, pushing the final boat away from the sinking island, just as the whale's back disappeared completely beneath the surface. He swam with strong strokes toward the ship, the water warm and surprisingly gentle despite the chaos. Hand pull him aboard, and as he lay dripping on the deck, catching his breath, he began to laugh, not from fear or relief, but from wonder. He had stood on the back of a living mountain. He had walked on something older than memory itself. Smiled at him. The sea has many secrets, young Sinbad. That was just the first. And as the ship sailed away, leaving the whale to sink back into its deep slumber, Sinbad understood that the world was stranger and more magnificent than he had ever imagined. The voyage continued, and the crew's bonds grew stronger through shared experience. At night, they told stories of what they had seen, each retelling adding new details until the truth and the tale became one. Sinbad learned that this was how sailors marked their journeys, not just in charts and distances, but in stories that would be carried home and shared in harbors throughout the world. Weeks later, they reached the port they had set out to find, traded their goods, and began the journey home. Sinbad returned to his city with money in his purse and wonder in his heart. But wonder is a restless thing. It does not let you remain still once you have tasted it. So after a time spent in the comfort of familiar streets, Sinbad found himself drawn back to the harbor, back to the ships, back to the horizon where the sea met the sky. His second voyage began on a day when the wind smelled of distant rain and possibility. This time, he sailed as a merchant in his own right, having invested his earnings into goods he hoped to trade profitably in foreign markets. The ship he joined was larger than the first, its hold filled with cargo from a dozen different merchants, all dreaming of profit and adventure in equal measure. They sailed for weeks through familiar waters, then beyond, into regions where the charts grew vague and the legends grew thick. One afternoon, when the sun hung directly overhead and the sea lay flat and glassy as a mirror, the lookout spotted land, a small island, rocky and barren, with no obvious signs of life. The captain decided to anchor and explore, hoping to find fresh water or perhaps wood for repairs. Sinbad went ashore with a small group, climbing the rocky slopes cautiously, alert for any sign of danger. They found something unexpected, a valley sheltered between two ridges, and in that valley, a sight that made them stop and stare. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of diamonds lay scattered across the ground, glittering in the sunlight like stars fallen from the sky. The valley held danger, too. Enormous serpents nested in caves along its walls, creatures so large a man could walk through their jaws, with scales like armor and eyes that reflected no light. These serpents guarded the diamonds jealously, making it impossible to simply walk in and gather the treasure. Sinbad watched from above, his mind working through the problem. The diamonds were valuable beyond measure, but what value had wealth to a dead man? Then he noticed something else. Great birds circling high above the valley. Birds so large their shadows darkened the ground below. As he watched, one of the birds dove down, snatched something from the valley floor, and flew away again. An idea formed in Sinbad's mind. Not a safe idea, but a possible one. The birds, he realized, were taking meat thrown down by hunters from the cliffs above. Pieces of lamb were hurled into the valley, and when the birds carried them back up, diamonds stuck to the meat, embedded in its surface. That night, Sinbad shared his observation with the group. Most thought him mad when he proposed his plan, but he was determined. At dawn, he tied several large pieces of meat to his body with strong rope, then lowered himself over the cliff edge into the valley. The descent was slow and frightening, the rope creaking under his weight, the cliff face scraping against his back. But he reached the bottom safely and immediately began gathering diamonds, pressing them into the meat tied around his chest and waist. He heard the cries of the giant birds. His heart raced, but he forced himself to remain still, lying flat among the diamonds and serpents, trusting in his plan even as doubt whispered in his mind. Then, a rush of wind, a shadow passing over him, talons gripping the meat on his back. The world lurched upward as the bird lifted him from the valley floor. Wind roared in his ears. His stomach dropped as the ground fell away below. Higher and higher the bird carried him, until the valley looked like a toy, until the sea stretched vast and blue in every direction. Then the bird descended toward its nest on a high cliff, dropping its prize, and Sinbad with it, onto the rocky ledge. Sinbad rolled free just as the bird began to tear at the meat. He scrambled to safety, his body bruised but unbroken, his pockets heavy with diamonds. The hunters above, seeing what had happened, lowered ropes and pulled him up to safety, amazed by his courage, or his foolishness, or perhaps the thin line between the two. Sinbad shared the diamonds generously with those who had helped him, understanding that wealth hoarded is wealth wasted. When he finally returned to his ship, the captain shook his head in wonder. "You are either blessed by fortune or touched by madness," he said. "Perhaps," Sinbad replied with a smile. "They are the same thing." The second voyage ended safely, and Sinbad returned home even wealthier than before. But more than wealth, he carried with him lessons about courage, that it was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. That fortune favored not just the bold, but the clever. That the greatest rewards often lay beyond the greatest risks. Yet even these lessons could not keep him home for long. The sea called to him the way it always did, that endless blue horizon whispering of wonders yet unseen. His third voyage began in spring, when the winds blew warm from the south and the seas ran calm and inviting. Sinbad joined a merchant vessel bound for the Spice Islands, those legendary lands where pepper grew on vines and cinnamon fell from trees like leaves. Fearless for weeks they sailed without incident, the voyage pleasant and profitable. The crew grew comfortable, lulled by good weather and easy days. But the sea, as Sinbad had learned, does not remain gentle forever. A storm rose suddenly, as they sometimes do in tropical waters. the sky darkening from blue to green to black in the span of an hour. Wind howled across the deck. Waves rose like mountains, their peaks crowned with foam that flew like snow through the air. The ship fought bravely, but the storm was too powerful. Wood splintered, sails tore, the mast cracked with a sound like thunder and crashed down across the deck. And then, with a terrible groaning, the hull began to break apart. Bad found himself in the water, clinging to a piece of the broken mast, waves washing over him again and again. The storm roared around him for what felt like hours, or perhaps days, time losing all meaning when survival demands every breath, every thought, every ounce of strength. Pensively, the storm passed. The sea calmed, and Sinbad, exhausted beyond measure, washed up on a beach of smooth, white sand, beneath a sky swept clean and blue. He longed time, letting the sun warm him, feeling his heartbeat slow from its desperate racing to something steadier, calmer. He was alive. That fact alone seemed miraculous enough. When he finally stood and looked around, he found himself on an island unlike any he had seen before. The vegetation was strange, trees with leaves like emerald glass, flowers that hummed softly as though singing to themselves, fruits hanging in clusters that glowed faintly even in daylight. Sparks walked inland, following a path that seemed almost deliberately maintained, though he saw no signs of inhabitants. The path led through a forest where the light fell in golden shafts, where the air smelled of honey and strange spices, where the silence felt thick and watchful. Then he emerged into a clearing, and there, standing in the center, was a creature that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a bird, but calling it merely a bird was like calling the ocean merely water. It stood taller than a man, with plumage that shifted through every color imaginable: ruby red, sapphire blue, emerald green, gold like the sun at noon. Its eyes were wise and ancient, holding a depth that suggested intelligence far beyond any animal Sinbad had ever known. The roc, he realized. The legendary bird from sailors' tales, said to be so powerful it could carry elephants in its talons, so rare that most considered it myth rather than reality. The roc regarded him calmly, tilting its magnificent head as though considering what to make of this small, shipwrecked human who had wandered into its territory. Sinbad bowed low, instinctively offering respect to something so clearly greater than himself. When he straightened, the roc had turned away, moving toward a massive nest built into the rocks at the clearing's edge. In the nest lay an egg, a single egg larger than a man, its shell gleaming with an opalescent sheen. Unborn. Sinbad watched, fascinated, as the roc settled over its egg protectively. He understood then that this was a sacred moment, a glimpse into something rare and precious. He backed away slowly, careful not to disturb the great bird, and continued exploring the island. Days passed in that strange place. Sinbad found fruit, eat, fresh water to drink, shelter in a cave overlooking the sea, and each day he returned to the clearing to watch the roc, drawn by its majesty and the profound peace he felt in its presence. Priceless foreign. He woke to find the roc standing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on him with clear intent. It called out, a sound like wind through canyons, like distant thunder, like music played on instruments larger than any human could build. Sinbad approached cautiously. The roc lowered itself, and in that gesture, Sinbad understood an invitation. Heart pounding, he climbed onto the great bird's back, gripping its feathers, soft as silk despite their size. Along into the air, and Sinbad felt his stomach drop as the ground fell away. Higher and higher they rose, until the island became a green dot in the blue expanse, until he could see the curve of the earth itself, until the clouds passed beneath them like rivers of mist. The flight lasted hours, or perhaps minutes that felt like hours in their intensity. The roc carried him across the sea, over other islands, across waters that held colors he had never seen before, until finally it descended toward a coastline Sinbad recognized, the shore of his own land, the beaches that bordered his home city. The rock set him down gently on the sand, then turned and regarded him one final time with those ancient, knowing eyes. Sinbad bowed again, deeper this time, understanding that he had been given an extraordinary gift, not just the flight itself, but the trust of a creature that owed him nothing. The rock spread its wings, a span wider than any ship, and took flight, growing smaller and smaller until it vanished into the distance. Bad walked home along familiar roads, his clothes ragged and salt-stained, his purse empty but his heart full. He had lost his cargo, his profit, everything he had invested in the voyage. But he had gained something worth far more, a story that would be told for generations, and the knowledge that wonders existed beyond the edge of maps, waiting for those brave enough to find them. Yet even this extraordinary journey could not satisfy him forever. The sea called, as it always did, with a voice that grew only stronger the longer he stayed on land. His fourth voyage began in summer, when the days stretched long and as part of a trading fleet, multiple ships sailing in formation for safety and mutual support. The merchants aboard were experienced, the sailors skilled, the cargo valuable. Everything seemed prepared for success. But the sea, as Sinbad had learned many times over, cared nothing for human preparations. The winds died completely. The sails hung limp, the ships drifted aimlessly, and the heat pressed down from above like a weight. Days passed without any breeze at all, a dead calm, the sailors called it, one of the most dangerous conditions at sea. Water ran low, tempers grew short. Some began to wonder if they would ever move again, if they were doomed to drift in circles until thirst or madness claimed them all. Then, on the horizon, shapes appeared. At first, just dark spots against the blue, then clearly visible as cliffs rising from the water. An island. The fleet changed course, rowing toward it with the last of their strength, hoping for fresh water, for wind, for any change in their fortunes. As they drew closer, however, something seemed wrong. The cliffs were too smooth, too regular. The rocks looked strange, almost like buildings, like structures carved by intelligent hands rather than shaped by wind and waves. They anchored in a bay and went ashore warily. What they found was both wonderful and terrible. A city, ancient beyond measure, built into the cliffs themselves. But it was abandoned, empty of all life save for birds nesting in the high towers and vines growing through broken windows. The architecture was unlike anything Sinbad had seen, arches that seemed to float without support, stairs that spiraled upward into darkness, rooms whose purposes he could not begin to guess. It was beautiful and eerie in equal measure, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall like waves, leaving behind only stones and questions. The merchants began to explore, looking for anything valuable that might compensate for the disastrous voyage. Sinbad wandered separately, drawn toward the heart of the city, where the largest structures stood. A central plaza, he found a statue, enormous, carved from black stone, depicting a figure that might have been human or might have been something else entirely. Around its base were inscribed symbols in no language he recognized, patterns that seemed to shift when he looked at them too long. As the sun began to set, painting the abandoned city in shades of gold and purple, the merchants gathered their findings and returned to the ships. They would stay anchored overnight and depart at dawn, hoping the winds would return now that they had made landfall. But Sinbad, as he fell asleep that night, could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the city was not as abandoned as it seemed, that something ancient and patient observed them from the shadows. He woke to screaming. The moon hung full and bright above, turning everything silver, and in that light, Sinbad saw figures moving through the city, tall, thin creatures that moved with a strange grace, their limbs too long, their faces hidden in shadow. The old ones, he thought, remembering tales told in whispers. The people who built this place, driven deep underground by some catastrophe, emerging only when the moon was full to walk among the ruins of their former glory. The merchants fled to their ships in panic, but Sinbad found himself, frozen, watching as the old ones moved through their ancient city with gestures of what could only be called sorrow. They touched the walls gently, traced patterns in the air, sang songs in voices like wind through empty corridors. They did not attack, they did not threaten. They simply mourned, these last survivors of a forgotten civilization, grieving for everything they had lost. Sinbad felt tears on his cheeks, tears for them, for their loss, for the impermanence of all things. He bowed to them, there in the moonlight, offering respect to their ancient pain. One of the old ward him, and though he could not see its face, he felt its attention, curious, surprised, and perhaps grateful that someone had acknowledged their existence rather than fleeing in terror. Then the moon set, and the old ones faded back into the earth, and morning came gentle and golden across the abandoned city. The merchant fleet departed with the returning wind, and Sinbad carried with him yet another lesson, that every civilization, no matter how great, is temporary, that loss is universal, that compassion costs nothing and means everything. The fourth voyage ended with moderate profits and extraordinary memories, but Sinbad was beginning to understand something deeper about his journeys, that they were changing him in ways gold never could, teaching him truths more valuable than any cargo. Almost by accident, Sinbad had intended to stay home longer this time, to rest and reflect on all he had experienced. But an old friend, a captain he had sailed with years before, came to him with a proposition. "One more journey," the captain said, "to the lands beyond the eastern seas, where silk is woven from moonlight and tea grows that can heal any sickness. One final adventure, old friend." Lowy Sinbad tried to refuse, but the call of the sea was in his blood now, as much a part of him as breathing. So he agreed, and within the week found himself once more on a ship's deck, watching his city shrink behind him as they sailed toward the rising sun. This voyage was longer than any before, months of sailing across waters that changed color from blue to green to purple, past islands that seemed to float rather than rest in the sea, through storms and calms and every mood the ocean could assume. The crew saw wonders that strained belief, fish that flew on gossamer wings, whales that sang songs so beautiful grown men wept, waters that glowed at night with light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. They traded at ports where the people wore clothes of spider silk, where buildings were grown from living trees rather than built from dead wood, where time itself seemed to flow differently, and an hour could pass like a minute, or a minute like an hour. And the greatest danger came when they sailed into waters, marked on no chart, where the compass spun uselessly, and the stars at night formed constellations Sinbad had never seen. Middle of nowhere and everywhere at once, they found an island that should not exist. It appeared at dawn, simply materializing out of mist, as though it had always been there, and they were only now seeing it. The island was perfect, too perfect. Trees laden with fruit that smelled of honey, springs of crystal water, beaches of sand so white it seemed to glow, and in the center, a palace of mother-of-pearl and gold, its towers reaching toward the sky. The crew approached cautiously, but there seemed to be no danger. No guards challenged them, no beasts prowled the undergrowth. The palace doors stood open, inviting. Inside, they found rooms filled with treasures beyond counting, jewels piled like grain, gold coins stacked to the ceiling, silks and spices and objects whose purpose and origin they could not begin to guess. It was as though every treasure lost at sea had somehow found its way here, to this impossible place. Merchants began loading their Sinbad felt uneasy. This felt like a trap, not a violent one, but a subtle snare for human weakness. He tried to warn the others, but his voice was drowned out by their excitement. Only when the sun began to set did they realize their mistake. The tide, which should have been going out, was coming in, but impossibly fast, rising foot by foot, minute by minute. And the island itself was sinking, settling slowly into the sea like the whale from Sinbad's first voyage, but with deliberate purpose rather than instinct. For their boats, dropping treasures in their haste, stumbling through rising water, the palace began to collapse around them, its perfect facade crumbling to reveal something else beneath. Old magic, ancient and uncaring, a test that they had failed through greed. Sinbad helped others reach safety, pulling men from the water, cutting loose boats that had become tangled. The last to leave, he watched as the island sank completely, taking with it all the treasure the merchants had fought so hard to gather. They sailed away in silence, humbled and empty-handed. That night, gathered on the deck beneath stars that had returned to their familiar positions, the captain spoke softly. "Some treasures," he said, "are meant to be seen, not taken. Some wonders exist only to teach us the difference." Sinbad nodded, understanding. The fifth voyage had cost them dearly in lost opportunity, but it had given them wisdom that might save them in future. Sometimes, the lesson itself was the treasure. When they finally reached home, months late, having survived on fish and rainwater, their holds empty, the merchants who had funded the voyage were furious. But Sinbad felt no regret. He had learned something vital, that wanting and having are different things, that some desires lead only to sorrow, that true wealth cannot be counted in gold. The sea called. Always it called. His sixth voyage began in autumn, when the winds turned cool and the sea took on deeper, darker hues. Sinbad sailed with a small crew on a fast ship, hired by a prince to find a rare medicine that grew only in the remotest corners of the world, a flower said to bloom once every 100 years, whose petals could cure any illness. The journey took them farther than Sinbad had ever traveled, to waters where icebergs floated like mountains of glass, and the sun barely rose above the horizon. They sailed through channels so narrow the oars scraped rock on both sides, across bays where strange lights danced in the sky at night, past shores where no human had ever set foot. Following directions from an old map written in a language none of them could read but somehow understood, they found the island where the flower grew. It was a small place, rocky and inhospitable, buffeted by constant winds that howled like tortured voices. At the island's heart stood a single tree, twisted and ancient, and at its base, sheltered from the wind, grew the flower they sought. It was beautiful in a way that defied description, petals like folded starlight, a scent that carried memories of every good thing that had ever happened, a presence that seemed to quiet the wind itself. But the flower was guarded, not by a beast or a warrior, but by an old woman who sat beside it, her face weathered by centuries of wind, her eyes holding depths that made even the sea seem shallow. "You have come for the flower," she said, not a question, but a statement. "Yes," Sinbad replied. "A prince lies dying. This flower is his only hope." The old woman nodded slowly. "Many come for the flower. Few understand its price." "What price?" Sinbad asked. "A memory," the old woman said. "Your most precious memory. The flower gives life, but it requires that you give up something that makes life worth living. Are you willing to pay this price for someone you do not know?" Sinbad stood silent for a long moment. His memories were all he truly owned, every voyage, every wonder, every lesson learned. They made him who he was. Without them, would he even be Sinbad anymore? But then he thought of the dying prince, of a life that might be saved, of suffering that might be ended. He thought of all the times strangers had helped him, the captain who first welcomed him aboard, the hunters who pulled him from the Valley of Diamonds, the rock that carried him home. "Yes," he said quietly, "I will pay it." Sinbad had seen cross her ancient face. "You have already paid, young sailor. Your willingness was the price, not the act itself. Take the flower. Use it well." Flower carefully, marveling at its beauty. As he held it, he realized that all his memories remained intact. The old woman had tested his character, not demanded actual payment. Some prices, he understood, are symbolic rather than literal. Some tests are passed by the willingness to sacrifice rather than the sacrifice itself. They sailed home quickly, racing against time, and delivered the flower to the prince's physicians. The medicine worked, and the prince recovered, and Sinbad's reputation grew. But more important than fame or reward was the quiet knowledge that he had acted rightly, that when tested, he had chosen compassion over self-preservation. The sixth voyage taught him perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that true courage is not about facing physical danger, but about being willing to lose what you value most for the sake of others. That the hardest choices are often the most important. That character is revealed not in easy moments, but in the space between what you want to do and what you should do. He returned home older and wiser, his hair touched with gray now, his face marked by wind and sun. Many assumed he would finally retire, settle into comfort, let younger men take their turn at the sea's challenges. The sea had one more voyage in store for Sinbad. His seventh and final journey began on a day of perfect clarity, when the sky stretched blue and infinite, and the water lay calm as glass. There was no merchant cargo this time, no treasure to seek, no medicine to find. Instead, Sinbad chartered a small boat and a minimal crew with a single purpose: to return to every place he had visited, to say goodbye to the wonders he had known. They sailed first to the island where he had stood on the whale's back. The great creature was still there, still floating in its eternal slumber, still wearing its blanket of vegetation. Sinbad did not disturb it this time, only watched from a distance and whispered thanks for the lesson it had taught him about the strangeness of the world. They visited the Valley of Diamonds, now empty of both serpents and gems, cleaned out by hunters who had learned the trick Sinbad had discovered. He felt no regret at the valley's emptiness, only satisfaction that his ingenuity had benefited others. They sailed past the Rock's Island, and though the great bird did not appear, Sinbad saw its shadow cross the sun at noon, a vast darkness that moved against the clouds for just a moment before vanishing. He smiled, knowing the magnificent creature was still there, still guarding its mysteries. They anchored briefly at the abandoned city, now more ruined than before, slowly being reclaimed by the sea. No old ones appeared, but Sinbad left an offering at the base of the black statue, a carving he had made during the voyage, a small ship representing journeys and discoveries, a gesture of continued respect. At the vanishing island, they found only empty water. The place had disappeared entirely, or perhaps moved to trap other greedy souls. Sinbad felt neither sadness nor triumph, only acceptance that some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. That place was too sacred, too remote, and Sinbad felt it would be wrong to disturb the old woman again. Instead, he stood on the deck and faced in the direction he knew it lay, and bowed once in gratitude. Fights had been revisited, and all the farewells made. Sinbad told the captain to sail for home. But as they turned south, the wind died, the same dead calm that had trapped him on his fourth voyage. For 3 days they drifted, the sea like glass around them, the sun blazing overhead. The crew grew nervous, but Sinbad remained calm. He felt that the sea was trying to tell him something, that this stillness had meaning beyond mere weather. On the fourth day, as the sun set in colors of orange and rose and purple, Sinbad climbed to the bow of the ship and spoke aloud to the water. "I understand," he said softly. "Thank you for everything you have taught me. Thank you for the wonders and the dangers, the beauty and the terror. I have learned from you, and I am grateful. But now it is time to return home. Please, if you will it, let us go." The words felt strange even as he spoke them, prayer or plea or simply acknowledgement, he wasn't sure which. But the sea had always seemed to him like a living thing, vast and conscious in ways that defied understanding. That night, as Sinbad slept on the deck beneath the stars, he dreamed. He dreamed of every voyage, every island, every creature and wonder he had encountered. But in the dream, they were not separate experiences, but parts of a single, continuous journey, a spiral that had carried him not just across the world, but deeper into himself. When he woke at dawn, a gentle breeze had risen from the south, steady, reliable, perfect for sailing home. The crew roused themselves with renewed energy, and the ship began to move, cutting smoothly through water that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the early light. As his city appeared on the horizon a week later, white buildings glowing in the sun, harbor crowded with ships, the sounds of life and commerce carrying across the water, Sinbad felt a profound sense of completeness. He had sailed 7 voyages. He had seen wonders beyond imagining. He had faced dangers that would have broken lesser men. He had learned courage, wisdom, humility, compassion, and a dozen other lessons woven so deeply into his being that he could no longer separate them from himself. But most importantly, he had learned when to stop, when to say, enough, when to recognize that the journey had fulfilled its purpose and it was time to rest. Walked through his city's streets last time as a sailor, savoring familiar sights and sounds. Children played in the fountains, merchants called their wares, old men sat in tea houses, sharing stories and laughter. The world continued its endless rhythms, beautiful in its ordinariness. He returned to his house, simple but comfortable, filled with small treasures from his voyages, and sat in his garden as evening fell. The sky shifted through its familiar palette of colors, stars emerging one by one like flowers opening in the darkness. Sinbad became known not just as a sailor and adventurer, but as a storyteller and a teacher. Young men would come to him seeking advice before their own voyages, and he would share his experiences, not to discourage them, but to prepare them for what they might face. "The sea will teach you," he would tell them, "if you are willing to learn. It will show you wonders if you keep your eyes open. It will test you if you are brave enough to face the tests. But remember, the goal is not to conquer the sea, but to understand it. Not to take from it, but to receive what it offers. Not to prove yourself to others, but to discover who you truly are." And on quiet nights, when the moon was full and the air smelled of salt, Sinbad would walk down to the harbor and stand at the end of the dock, listening to the gentle lap of waves against the posts, feeling the breeze that came from impossible distances. The sea still called to him. It always would. But now he understood that answering that call did not require actually sailing. The voyages lived within him, as much a part of him as his heartbeat, as his breath. He carried the sea inside himself, and that was enough. So ends the tale of Sinbad's 7 voyages, 7 journeys that became one journey, 7 lessons that became a single wisdom, 7 adventures that transformed a young man seeking excitement into an elder offering guidance. But the story does not truly end, for stories never do. They continue in the hearts of those who hear them, in the dreams of those who imagine themselves on similar journeys, in the quiet moments when we all wonder what lies beyond our familiar shores. Now, gentle traveler who has journeyed with Sinbad through these tales, it is time for you to rest as well. Let lull you deeper into peace. Let the memory of distant islands fade into dreams. Let your breathing slow to match the gentle rocking of a ship at anchor in a safe harbor. Feel the day's tension drift away like mist rising from morning water. Feel your thoughts grow soft and distant as clouds on the horizon. Feel your body sink into comfort the way a tired sailor sinks into his hammock after a long watch. The voyages are complete. The lessons are learned. The wonders have been witnessed. Now there is only rest, deep, peaceful, restorative rest. The sea continues its eternal motion, waves rising and falling in patterns older than memory. But you are safe on shore, far from storms, wrapped in the warm darkness of night. The stars above keep their patient watch. The moon traces its path across the sky, and the world spins slowly through space, carrying you gently toward sleep. Cancel of the days, let go of tomorrow's plans. They will still be there when you wake. Let go of everything except this moment, this breath, this gentle descent into dreams. Sinbad sleeps peacefully in his garden, beneath jasmine and stars. The city sleeps around him, safe behind its walls. The harbor sleeps too, ships rocking gently in their berths, sailors dreaming of distant horizons. And so, gentle traveler, we arrive at the end of Sinbad's 7 voyages. But before we part ways, let us linger a while longer in this place of calm, where the boundary between waking and dreaming grows soft and blurred. The night has listened carefully. You can hear the distant sound of waves meeting the shore, that eternal rhythm that has lulled sailors to sleep since the first humans looked upon the sea and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. Sinbad sits in his garden now, an old man with silver in his beard and lines around his eyes that speak of laughter and wisdom earned through experience. The jasmine blooms release their sweetness into the cool evening air. A fountain murmurs nearby, its water catching moonlight and turning it into liquid silver. He is at peace. After all his adventures, all his dangers and discoveries, he has found something more valuable than any treasure he brought back from distant shores. He has found contentment, that quiet joy that comes not from having everything, but from being grateful for what you have. Around him, the city sleeps. In homes throughout the streets, families rest together. Children dream of their own adventures, perhaps inspired by the stories they have heard of brave Sinbad. Parents sleep with the satisfaction of another day completed, another evening of safety and warmth. 2, though it is never truly silent. The ships rock gently in their berths, wooden hulls creaking softly, ropes swaying in the night breeze. On some vessels, night watchmen keep their vigil, but even they move slowly, peacefully, knowing that this is a calm night, a safe night, a night for rest rather than worry. Above all, the stars shine with that ancient, patient light. Some of those stars guided Sinbad home when he was lost. Some of them watched over him during storms. All of them remain, constant and true, mapping the sky in patterns that sailors have followed for thousands of years. The moon traces its path across the darkness, full and bright tonight, painting everything below in shades of silver and shadow. It is the same moon that shone on Sinbad's 7 voyages, the same moon that has watched over countless journeys and countless homecomings. And you, dear listener, you who have traveled with Sinbad through all these tales, you too deserve to rest now. The adventures are complete, the lessons have been learned, the wonders have been witnessed. Now, there is only this gentle moment, this soft descent into sleep. Let your breathing slow even further. Each breath in draws peace. Each breath out releases tension. In and out, slow and steady, like waves upon the shore. In and out, gentle and natural, like the rocking of a ship in a calm harbor. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into comfort. Your arms grow heavy, relaxed, completely at ease. Your legs release all tension, becoming soft and still. Your shoulders drop away from your ears. Your jaw loosens. Every muscle, every fiber, every cell in your body receives permission to rest. You need to be except here. Nothing you need to do except breathe. No thoughts you need to think except peaceful, drifting thoughts that fade like footprints in sand, disappearing gently, leaving only smooth, empty calm. Sitting beside him in the warm darkness, the jasmine scent surrounds you, the fountain's music soothes you. Above, the stars shine down with their eternal, gentle light. You are safe here. You are welcome here. You belong here, in this place of perfect peace. Sinbad might tell you, if you asked, that all his voyages taught him one essential truth, that home is not just a place, but a feeling. It is this feeling, this deep, abiding sense of safety and belonging that you can carry with you always, no matter where you go or what challenges you face. The garden grows quieter still, whispering now rather than singing. The breeze that stirs the jasmine becomes softer, gentler, a touch as light as silk across your skin. In this deepening quiet, you can feel sleep approaching, not rushing toward you, but drifting closer like a tide coming in, slow, inevitable, natural. It rises around you gradually, lifting you gently, supporting you completely. Your eyelids grow heavier with each moment. If they are not already closed, they want to close now. Closing them feels good, feels right, feels like the most natural thing in the world. Behind your closed eyes, there is only soft darkness, comfortable, welcoming, safe. Your thoughts begin to scatter like stars reflected in water when a pebble drops. They fragment, disperse, fade away, and in their place comes a beautiful emptiness, not the emptiness of lack, but the emptiness of space, of openness, of room for dreams to enter when they are ready. The night wraps around you like the softest blanket ever woven. It holds no cold, no discomfort, no worry, only warmth, only peace, only the gentle pressure of rest settling over you like autumn leaves drifting down to cover the earth. Somewhere in the distance, you might hear the call of a night bird, or perhaps it is only imagination, a sound that exists in that borderland between waking and sleeping. It does not matter. What matters is the feeling it brings, a sense of the world continuing its ancient rhythms while you rest, safe and protected. Sinbad rises slowly from his seat in the garden. He is ready for sleep, too, after all these years, after all these stories. He walks toward his house with the slow, careful steps of someone who has learned to appreciate each moment, each movement, each breath. Before he goes inside, he pauses and looks up at the stars one more time. He smiles, a small, private smile of gratitude. Then he bows slightly, honoring the sky, the sea, the night, and all the mysteries they contain. And as he disappears into his house, as the lamp in his window dims and then goes dark, you feel yourself drifting even deeper into rest. The last threads connecting you to wakefulness are loosening, dissolving, falling away. Between the world you know and the world of dreams, this is the most peaceful place, this threshold, this boundary, this gentle space where nothing is required of you except to let go, to trust, to surrender, to sleep. The sea continues its eternal conversation with the shore, waves whispering secrets in a language older than words. The wind carries those whispers through the city, through gardens and courtyards, through open windows where sleepers rest in safety and comfort. And that wind, that gentle breath of the world, carries you too, carries you like a leaf on a stream, effortlessly, peacefully, toward the deep waters of sleep where dreams wait patiently to greet you. Your body has become so relaxed now that you can barely feel its boundaries. You are not separate from the darkness around you, but part of it. You blend into the night like a drop of water blending into the ocean, distinct no longer, but absorbed into something larger, softer, infinitely peaceful. Time loses meaning here. Minutes might be hours, hours might be seconds. It does not matter. In sleep, in dreams, time flows differently. and you are about to enter that timeless realm where the rules of waking life do not apply. Sinbad, in his bed now, lets out a long, contented sigh. His adventures are behind him, his lessons are learned, his stories are told. There is nothing left to do but rest, and he does so gratefully, his breathing slowing, his consciousness fading, his mind drifting into the healing darkness of deep sleep. You follow him into that darkness, not consciously, for consciousness is fading too, but naturally, inevitably, drawn by the same force that pulls rivers to the sea, that guides birds on their migrations, that turns flowers toward the sun. The last sounds of the world grow distant, the fountain in the garden, the waves in the harbor, the whisper of wind through palm fronds. They do not disappear, but they recede, becoming background music to the silence that fills your mind, a silence that is not empty but full, pregnant with peace, rich with rest. Your last conscious thought, if you have one at all, is simply this: gratitude. Gratitude for this story, for this night, for this moment of perfect peace before sleep claims you completely. And then, so gently that you cannot say exactly when it happens, you cross that final threshold. Waking becomes sleeping. Consciousness becomes dream. The day releases you completely, and the night welcomes you into its deep, restorative embrace. You are asleep now, deeply, peacefully, completely asleep. And in that sleep, you are safe, you are whole, you are exactly where you need to be. Their slow wheel across the sky. The moon continues its journey toward the horizon. The sea continues its endless dance with the shore. And you continue too. Continue breathing, continue resting, continue healing in the blessed darkness of night. We'll bring new adventures, new challenges, new stories to live. But tomorrow is not yet here. Right now, there is only sleep, only peace, only the infinite gentleness of a world at rest. May your dreams be as vast as the ocean Sinbad sailed. May they be as beautiful as the islands he discovered. May they carry you to places of wonder and return you safely to morning's light, refreshed and renewed, ready for whatever your own voyage may bring. But for now, simply sleep, deeply, peacefully, completely. Championships is over. The night holds you, and all is well. Sleep, gentle traveler. Sleep, brave dreamer. Sleep, dear soul who has journeyed so far and now deserves to rest. The voyages are complete. The harbor is reached. The anchor is down. And you are home.